Hello everyone, welcome back to the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Petaling Jaya. Hope you're having an amazing day. I've just come out of the aquarium shop because I really needed to buy some medicine for my turtle. He's suffering from a bacterial infection. And Petaling Jaya is a very good place because, well, this is a particular part of Petaling Jaya known as Sea Park. So there are 3 aquarium shops in total in this area. There's what's the name of that one? There's Sunhin's over there. There's Irene Aquarium, which is slightly bigger and more popular. And there's another one whose name escapes my memory. Now you might notice Petaling Jaya is a very Chinesey sort of place. There's a Chinese coffee shop there, very nice, where I'm gonna go get my dinner. And there's another Chinese restaurant over there. So it's a very Chinesey sort of neighborhood, you know. So if you're one of those East Asian-centric Asian Americans who are coming to Malaysia, you don't have to meet a single Southeast Asian person here if you don't want to, okay? Shout out to Douglas Kim. If you don't want to meet Southeast Asian people, just come to Petaling Jaya. Well, you don't have to meet a single Southeast Asian person here, okay? But having said that, today I would like to talk to you about racism in Petaling Jaya. Let's go. Now, I know I've mentioned that I'm a Peranakan, which is basically a descendant of the early arrival Chinese sailors who came to the Malay Peninsula and married local Malay women and basically created this hybrid culture known as the Peranakan culture. But I basically blend in perfectly when I'm in Petaling Jaya, save for my accent of course, but if I were to keep my mouth shut, I would blend in perfectly because, well, I look just about as Chinese as any other Hakka or Cantonese or Teochew fellow, right? Well, really, my brother looks a lot more Peranakan than I do, so, you know, oh, this is a Hakka Yong Tau Fu restaurant. It's very nice. Yeah, I'll do a video in this place another day because today I have a pressing issue to talk about and it can't wait because it's raining and I need to finish this video quickly before the rain comes back. So you may or may not have been informed, but recently on Twitter there was quite a heated discussion between members of the Malaysian Chinese community and the Malaysian Indian community. Now basically some of the Malaysian Indian friends of ours brought up the issue of racism against Malaysian Indians, which has been a staple of Malaysian society ever since British times. And it hasn't really gone away because even today we still see basically flashes of this ugly colonial racism manifested in the surrogates of the colonizers who continue this type of behavior. For example, in Singapore recently there was a Korean streamer who was shocked and appalled to discover that a Singaporean Chinese lady was telling her, you know, you'd better cover up, don't wear sleeveless dresses, otherwise you might get raped by Banglas or Indians. Literally, those were the Chinese lady's words. And it's well known in our country that, you know, the word Keling, which is the equivalent of the Nigger word, is sometimes used by Malaysian reactionaries in order to insult Indian people of Indian descent. Now, even though the word Keling originates, and if you pardon me for the usage of this word, it originates from the South Indian kingdom of Kalinga, the fact of the matter is that during British times it was used in a derogatory way. And sometimes, even today, Malaysian reactionaries still use it as a way to bully and to put down people of Indian descent when they can't beat them in their arguments. And of course, recently there was a case of a property agent who got into a verbal spate with an Indian client, and he said to her, well, I had no intentions of doing business with Indians in the first place. He actually said it in those words. Now, even though the company sacked him, the fact of the matter is that he was a symptom of a wider societal problem. That is to say, unfounded prejudice against our Indian friends. For you see, racism exists in virtually every multicultural society, but racism does not affect the Indians and the Chinese in the same way. Let me explain. See, racism against Chinese and Indians manifests itself differently. Now, for Chinese, usually reactionaries in Malaysia, when they want to be racist against Chinese, they might say, "Oh, you Chinese really like the communists, don't you?" Because basically being called a communist in Malaysia is like being called a Nazi in Germany, basically. It's very unacceptable to be a communist in this country. Or, this is what I like to describe as the Schrodinger's Chinese paradox. On one hand, the Chinese are either evil, degenerate communists, or they are reactionary capitalists who hoard wealth and keep it to themselves. So that's the stereotype among Malaysian reactionaries when the Chinese are concerned. So it's kind of like a model minority stereotype, if you will. But it's still more flattering than the stereotype that Malaysian reactionaries have about Indians. But the stereotype that Malaysian reactionaries slap the Indian with is usually either the drunkard or the undesirable tenant who will trash your place, or basically, you know, a person who's untrustworthy. Now, there's a Chinese independent school I used to work at. One of the academic directors actually would apparently say behind closed doors that between an Indian and a snake, who do you kill first? That's unfortunately a byproduct of colonialism, because whatever stereotypes that we have of different races, whether it be lazy Malay or drunken, untrustworthy Indian or shifty, up to no good Chinese, these all originate from the colonizer. But basically what happened was, when these people on Twitter of the Indian community started bringing up their concerns about racism against the Indians in Malaysia, this Chinese Malaysian Twitterer who grew up in Petaling Jaya, where I am right now, had to just chip in with her own 2 cents and basically say that, you know, I have never experienced racism in Petaling Jaya. Well, Petaling Jaya is mostly Chinese, so I would be very surprised if you actually experienced racism in Petaling Jaya. But the fact of the matter is that many Indian people in Malaysia felt gaslighted by this Twitter user's comments, basically trying to white-splain racism to the Indian community, saying that I have lived in Petaling Jaya my whole life and I've never experienced racism. Well, the fact of the matter is that you are not Indian, and even though you can cognitively understand what it's like to be an Indian person, you cannot really speak on behalf of them because you are not Indian at the end of the day. Like, I can't speak on behalf of an African man. Cognitively, I can understand an African man's point of view, but I can't say I know what it's like to be an African man. Just like I don't know what it's like to be an Asian American. An Asian American doesn't know what it's like to be a straight Chinese Peranakan. And you, as a Chinese Malaysian, yes, you are a minority as well, and yes, you feel that, you know what, we all face discrimination by the government. But at the same time, you don't suffer in the same way as an Indian person. The thing is, when people talk about racism against their community, they don't only mean microaggressions like being called Keling or being called a lazy drunk. Yeah, sure, I mean, that's awful and abominable and racist. Just like when people talk about racism by the white Anglo-Saxon community towards Asians or Africans in America or Great Britain, it doesn't mean just, you know, calling them things like chink or calling them things like nigger. Those words are appalling, but that's not the end all of racism. Racism also manifests itself in the way people are treated. in their day-to-day interactions. It may not even be explicit, but it may be implicit. For example, when certain bosses, for example, do not want to hire Indians, they may say, for example, that, you need to speak a certain language, for example, Mandarin, in order to get a job at my company. And if the Indian fellow speaks perfect Mandarin, well, then they'll find some other reason not to hire this candidate. And another way racism can manifest itself is in housing. When landlords want to rent out houses, they might not say that we don't rent out to Indians, but they might basically ignore or avoid doing business with Indians. I'm talking about landlords of all races here, because all of us are still suffering from colonizer adult syndrome, yes? So many of us still perceive each other in the same way British colonizers perceived us, you see. So, racism is not only being called like an N-I-G-G-E-R or a Keling or a Ching. Racism can also manifest itself in the way people treat you. For example, if people don't want to do business with you, if people don't want to rent a house to you and your family, or people don't want to sell you ice cream just for the crime of being Indian. Well, there was an ice cream seller actually in Malaysia who did not sell ice cream to Indian people, and as it turns out, it's because he got into an altercation with a bunch of drunk Indian guys previously. And so because of that, his mind was tainted against Indian people. And yes, while, the fact of the matter is that a kind couple or a kind family bought ice creams for that Indian family, the fact of the matter is that many of us still basically have not overcome this false consciousness of racism. Because racism is basically a form of false consciousness that needs to be eradicated from our society. And many of us still suffer from it. And racism also manifests itself in the way people are perceived before one has even had a conversation with them, in the way they are perceived by others. For example, let me give you a personal example. My ex-girlfriend's sister fell in love with an Indian chap in high school. And they would have been a happy couple if it had not been for their auntie, who vetoed this relationship. Why? Because apparently, according to my ex-girlfriend's auntie, Indian men don't treat women well. That was what she said. And of course, considering that many Chinese men also don't treat women well, this was quite a skewed statement. Because you can't say that this group of men treats women well and this group of men does not treat women well. Because in any group of men, you're always going to find misogynists. And in any group of men, you're always going to find gentlemen. But when you say, don't marry an Indian chap because they don't treat women well, even though you might have been saying it out of concern for your own niece, that was basically a racist, bigoted statement that was etched in colonial thought. And unfortunately, there are many people in this country who have still not been cured of their colonial mentality. The racists will basically find a way to racialize problematic behaviors and ignore these behaviors in people from their own community. And it can also be, internalized. For example, there are some Asian American women I've seen who say that Asian men are abusive, Asian men are controlling, la-di-da-di-da, but they act as if abusive and controlling white men don't exist. So the problem is that if you view things through a racialized lens, then you eventually end up racializing certain problematic behaviors. And if these problematic behaviors are exhibited by people in your own race, you just sweep that under the rug, because that's what racists do. Now, is my ex-girlfriend's auntie a horrible person? No, I'm not saying that. But she suffers from a thing known as false consciousness, which basically is when people are living in a form of delusion. And racism is one of the worst, most odious forms of false consciousness in this world. So yes, our Indian friends do have a right to be concerned about racism that they face in this country for the crime of being Indian. And no, if you're Malay or you're Chinese, you don't have a right to speak over them because you are not them, you understand? Just like I don't have a right to speak on behalf of an Asian American or British Asian. Yeah, I know I sound Angloid, but I'm not British, I'm Malaysian. The point is, your experiences are not another person's experiences. And if you tried to speak on behalf of someone from a different community suffering from vastly different issues from what you suffer, it would be like trying to understand what it's like to have 6 legs. You know what it's like to have 6 legs? No. You know what it's like to have 4 legs? That's the same as trying to understand or trying to put yourself in the position of an Indian person who suffers from discrimination. If you're Chinese, you just can't. It's like trying to understand what it's like to have 6 legs. You just can't. I don't mean to use this analogy to say that people of any race are insects. That's not my point. My point is that, you really cannot comprehend a person's experiences unless you've walked in that person's shoes. And I don't think there's a way you can actually transplant your soul into an Indian person's body. Yeah? So this message is basically for the person who made those comments, those gaslighting comments like, I've never experienced racism in Petaling Jaya. Perhaps you are the one with the problem. It's very much like how when African Americans bring up issues that concern their communities, for example, police brutality or racial profiling, you always have some model minority jackass who will jump up and say, what? I'm a person of color too. I'm Asian American. I'm Chinese American. Yet I don't get brutalized by the police. You are not African American. You don't have a right to speak on behalf of someone from that community if you are not a member of that particular ethnic group, because their experiences and yours are as different as black and white. Pardon the distasteful pun. Just like, okay, you wouldn't like it if an African American tries to bring up issues that you face. For example, you say dating is so hard in America for Asian fellas. I don't know if it's true or not, but some African American guy says, what? I don't have a problem. I'm a person of color too. Maybe the problem is you, so you ought to fix your attitude. Yeah, you don't like it when someone from a different community tries to white-splain how you ought to feel. Correct? So that is basically how our Indian friends in Malaysia have been made to feel. And you know, on behalf of the Chinese Malaysian community, on behalf of those irresponsible members who have been gaslighting the Indian community, I can't speak for the Malays, but there are also, I will leave that to my Malay friends to apologize on behalf of members of the Malay community. I'll speak on behalf of the Chinese community. I apologize on behalf of the irresponsible members of my community. While I can't pretend to have experienced what you go through, I am aware of the plight that you face, and it's not a laughing matter, and I will do my best to constantly educate my fellow Malaysians and basically cure them of this false consciousness that they suffer from, because ultimately I believe that all Malaysians, you know, most Malaysians are inherently good but suffering from false consciousness. But not to worry, we will cure them of false consciousness, and hopefully we can actually have a happy, harmonious society where people respect one another's differences and bear no malice to others simply on the basis of their race or ethnicity. Thank you. Have a good day.